Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hidden Gems. This week we are going to be taking a look at a couple more classic metal albums that have kind of flown under the radar for one reason or another that we think deserve a little more attention. And joining me again, as usual, is Nels.
Hello.
This week we are going to be looking at a couple of bands that are not as well known in general. Like in the past, I've done albums by Black Sabbath and Creator and kind of these like lesser known albums by well-known bands. And this week I'm choosing the band Oz from Finland, and their third album, Third Warning, which Nels fortunately has a copy of because I do not have one anymore. I think it got purged in my LP sales back in the year 2000, sadly. And as you can see, right off the bat, just looking at that cover, the band had a very strange image. Like, I don't know what they were ever going for, but it was definitely their own thing. So I applaud them for that. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Oz, because they were definitely a heavy metal band, and they had a lot of the kind of staples of heavy metal, but they were always just a little bit off. Like, they were a little bit in their own little world. The most well-known album, obviously, for them is Fire in the Brain, their second album, which came out in, I think, 82, maybe 83. And it's the one that seems to get all the attention over the years. Like, it's been reissued a bunch, and, partially because, as a fun fact, the hand holding the skull is actually Quorthon from Bathory.
Oh, yeah. I knew that.
Which makes sense because it was actually recorded with Boss, the Quorthon's dad, who ran Black Mark Records and was also the producer on a lot of I think all the Bathory albums.
Interesting.
I think they had a studio or something. But and for some reason, a lot of people just kind of lost interest in the band after this album. And 1984 is when Third Warning came out, and to me, it's like every bit as good as Fire in the Brain. Like, there's only 8 songs, I think, on each album. But I like all 8 songs on this album. I mean, the musicianship is not going to blow you away, but it's also very, very good. Like, it's a nice blend of classic heavy metal, a little new wave of British heavy metal, and just kind of their own thing. Going back a little bit to the history of the band, so they started out in Finland, and I think they actually released their first album and recorded it in Finland before they moved to Sweden.
Oh, that's right.
And it's a 5-piece band, and one of the things I like about them is, like, they have 2 guitarists, but they don't, like, it's not like Maiden or Thin Lizzy or something where it's like, that's the main focus of the sound. Like, it's not, it's kind of more subtle the way they use the 2 guitarists.
There's definitely that whole, the 80s in general are such a transitional year for heavy metal. And like you said, the image, it's like, what were they going for? Well, they didn't know. I mean, they were making stuff up. And I think the same with the sound of a lot of it, which leads to some really unique sounding and very original music.
Yeah, and the vocals, let me go back for a moment and just talk about some of the oddities of this band. Looking at their band names, because they all picked, they decided for some reason that they didn't want to use their real names, so they chose these bizarre names like Ape DiMartini is the vocalist. You have the album there. Can you help me out with some of the others?
Yes. It's interesting. Ape DiMartini is the vocalist, right? Jay Blade, maybe his real name, I don't know. Speedy Fox on lead and rhythm guitars, and Spooky Wolf on lead and rhythm guitars.
Spooky Wolf.
And then the drummer is just credited as Mark Roughneck, aka Mr. Big Sticks.
That's excellent. And he's the only person who's still in the band today. Like, he's that stuck with them when they reunited.
Special guest Shadow. Black Noise and Gong with a capital G.
Ah, maybe that's Quorthon.
That's what I assumed right away.
But yeah, the vocals themselves are actually quite unique. Like, he's got a very distinctive character. it kind of, the closest I could come up with to comparing it to anybody was kind of somewhere between Chris Boltonthal from Gravedigger and Biff Byford. Like it's got kind of that rough sound to it, but it's also melodic. And he doesn't have a huge range, but he has a good range of styles. Like he can sing like pretty clean on some parts, but then like
he does have a bit of a range too. I mean, he hits the high notes on a few songs, not like, Rob Halford or something.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, definitely you can, and it really clear a lot of it has that 80s vocal production on this album, very echoey, but you can still understand everything very clearly, and
yeah,
well recorded.
Yeah, the production in general is not great. It's good. Like you can really hear the different instruments clearly. I was listening to it today, and I noticed the bass was actually stood out quite a bit more than I remembered. But yeah, the guitar sound is not as clear and upfront as it could be, and like you said, the vocals have that kind of 80s reverb to them a little bit more than they probably need. But
yeah,
it all comes together pretty well, and I think out of all their albums, like they never had a great production. So I think this was as good as anything they ever had. Because going back to their first album, which I actually do still have.
Nice.
Amazing cover that they went all out on.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then it's got a nice little, it looks like a raven thing on the back.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, this was very underproduced, and they hadn't really quite found their sound yet. Like it's still pretty good, but yeah, it's definitely not. It's got some of the more of that 70s hard rock sort of sound to it. And then the follow-up to Third Warning, Decibel Storm. Again, brilliant cover.
Yeah.
And I have to talk about this logo because it's like, I don't know if you can see it as well on this one, but it's just
odd.
These really odd, like little tied things around it. And yeah, it's just like, I really want to talk to the person that developed their logo and find out what was going on there.
Hey, on that other cover that you just held up, the one with the
This one?
yeah. So look at the logo. It's a cutout, and you can see stuff through it, right? Like there's a picture behind it. Well, look at this. If you look real close, all this weird stuff is that photograph that's behind.
Oh, that's bizarre.
Isn't that weird?
This is like a mixing board or something. It's
yeah,
like,
it looks. You can't make it out at all on here. I just thought it was like some weird video noise that's really posterized, but it's that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of knobs and like input levels, and
probably a picture from that studio.
yeah, it could be.
Interesting.
And then, yeah, they came back in 2011 or 12, I forget now, with this, again, a terrible cover, more elaborate, but still not good. And this was most of the original members, but it was sadly, it wasn't a full album. It was like half of the songs were new songs and half of them were re-recordings of old songs, which...
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
And it's a gatefold, like...
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's a full album in that it's like, 11 songs, but half of them are old.
Right.
But, oh, yeah.
Wow.
A very elaborate gatefold.
Dang. I wasn't aware of that one. The main thing I wanted to talk about was just, I hadn't actually listened to this album in a very long time. This is one of the albums that I had on record. And at some point I switched over completely to CDs, and I backfilled a lot, but I didn't, there were certain things I just didn't get. And I liked this album back in the day a lot, but I hadn't listened to it in a very long time. So when you said that was your pick for this this edition of Hidden Gems, I listened to it obviously quite a bit, and at first the production was like, oh my god, I don't remember it being this badly produced. But it after a while you realize it's not really that badly produced. It's just kind of like stuff was recorded like that in the 80s, especially the early 80s, and especially these independent labels. Right. And it doesn't sound bad. It's just at first it struck me that, oh man, this is hard to listen to. But after you get past that, then there's just great songs on here, and so many things that I remember really clearly. And this is also one of the one of the bands that we would play at the record store that I worked at quite a bit, especially
Really?
Fire in the Brain. That was one of Mike's favorites, but we played Third Warning quite a bit. We had, this is one of the ones that we had a promo copy of. And so a lot of these songs, just listening to them again, just was really brought back a lot of memories. And I'm like, oh yeah, I love that part in this song. And oh yeah, there's that vocal part here. And like you said, it definitely reminds me of, this. The early 80s was still pretty prototypical metal in a lot of ways. And there was a lot of, is it hard rock? Is it metal? What's the difference?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a ton of hard rock influences on this album as well.
Yeah. And like you said, there are a lot of moments on this album that just always kind of stuck with me over the years. Like I would just kind of find myself singing them. Like Rock and Roll Widow, it has that kind of weird deadpan chorus.
Right.
Where he just repeats the Rock and Roll Widow over and over again.
Yeah.
And they even have like that one version towards the end where it's just the vocals and drums. It's like those kind of little touches I really appreciate.
Yeah, it's like in the recording studio and the mixing, they decided to kind of take a chance and have an arrangement that was non-standard, which is pretty cool. I just realized that the bass player gets credit for all the music and all the lyrics.
The bass player is
JC Blade.
JC Blade. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me of something else about this album where, the song Turn the Cross Upside Down.
Oh, yeah.
Came out as a single. I think it was in 84, but I think it came out before this album came out, like just barely. And I only say that because the album cover is similar to this album cover, and it's got a song from, excuse me, it's got a song from Fire in the Brain as a B-side. But there was, and apparently JC Blade, they had like, when they were recording Turn the Cross Upside Down, it was like a separate recording session, and they had like a bunch of weird, mysterious things happen in the studio. And
of course,
according to Metal Archives, like he got a royalty check for 666 krona. And from that point on, he decided not to write any more occult songs because he was freaked out by it. And it's so funny to me looking back, like how many bands from the 70s and 80s were like really weirdly superstitious about things. You have all these stories.
Seriously, it was like,
they
was very funny. It's so bizarre.
And then like the best part of that is like that's kind of become like their biggest well-known song. Like if you go on Spotify, it's got like way more plays than like any other song in their catalog.
Yeah.
And it actually shows up on the Canadian version of Third Warning, which I need to find now because it's a great song. Like it's one of their best songs. So I don't know why it just wasn't put on the other versions of the album.
Because of the devil, Dan.
Because of the devil, yeah. Well, you'd think the record labels wouldn't care about that.
In fact, they're all in league with Satan. So why wouldn't they want that?
I'm trying to remember if I actually. Because I think you taped me either this whole album or a couple of songs. I feel like Rock and Roll Widow and Samurai in particular. Like maybe you taped me those songs, but I don't remember if that was the first time I heard Oz or if I already had Fire in the Brain at that point. It's all kind of a blur.
I remember once again at the record store I worked at, we get a lot of promos, and Fire in the Brain was definitely the first promo of Oz that we got, and it's always pretty interesting on those days when we would get like this big cardboard box full of like, I don't know, 20 or 30 albums that we had no idea who the band was or what they sounded like. And, we knew what label they were on, and there was usually a little cover letter saying, here's our latest blah, blah, blah. And we were a heavy metal oriented store, so we mostly got heavy metal promos. But yeah, it was always just like total crapshoot of, you never know what you're going to get in those boxes. And Fire in the Brain was one that were like, oh yeah, we'd take the records out of the box that they came in, and we'd play them. And if we liked them, we'd put them into the play bin. And if we didn't like them, we'd put them into this other bin that I think Mike would then shrink wrap and then sell.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely had a shrink wrap machine in the back. Well, a lot of import LPs that we bought would come without any shrink wrapping, even if they weren't promos. And so we had to have a way to shrink wrap records. But yeah, if stuff came free and it wasn't a cutout,
Right.
or maybe even if it was sometimes, then yeah. But it definitely, that was one that made the grade. It was like into the playlist, the play bin, and there was probably usually a couple, like maybe a 50 records in there that we would rotate through, and that one got a lot of play. So that was why I knew about Oz, and why when Third Warning came out, again, I think we probably got a promo, but I also just probably bought it.
Yeah, that could be why I bought Fire in the Brain, unless I heard it at the Record Garden.
It definitely could be. And, it's funny, back in those days when there wasn't like a way to preview music anywhere.
Right.
Those promo records were really effective, and having a store that, like the one I worked at, that was focused on the type of music that you liked, that's what you would go there and just listen to a bunch of new stuff. It's kind of neat experience.
So yeah, I think that's all I have to say pretty much about Oz. So I will hand it over to you, and
yeah,
if you have any comments about it.
I just again, it was just really interesting to kind of revisit this after having not heard it for a very long time, and yeah, it has stood up well. The recording quality again is not the best, but it's fairly indicative, or it's of its age. It feels like a 1984 record, and it feels like some of that proto heavy metal, not quite formed yet. Lots of different influences going on. So it's a lot of original music, and I really like it for that. And this is back in the day when you could be a metal fan, but you couldn't be just I'm only into this little teeny subgenre of music, because there's maybe only one band doing that. So
yeah,
a lot of originality going back along in those days, sort of formative years. Which actually,
yes, a good transition.
Brings me nicely to this album, and this is an interesting album. It's another one that I had this record of. I don't actually remember how I got this. I noticed that it's a cutout, but it must have been a promo. But I think 1984, we probably didn't get a promo of this at the Plague, the print Plague. There's no way, and it's on Target Records. So I don't know where I got this or why I would have bought it, other than maybe I read about it in Kerrang or something. I mean, they toured Europe with Motorhead and stuff, so they got some press. And of course, if it's a cutout, hopefully if I bought it, it was probably super cheap. But yeah, this is like, again, a 1984 album. And the first thing that I notice on it is it has that sound of the very early thrash. It's like, I wrote a list of other albums that came out the same year, and it's like the first Metal Church album,
right.
That just, it has that. I mean, this doesn't sound like Metal Church, but it has that feel of, hey, this is going to be thrash. This is the things that are going to lead into thrash, And that same year, Ride the Lightning came out from Metallica, which was just a huge leap in Bay Area thrash sound. Slayer, Haunting the Chapel was out. Anthrax, Fistful of Metal, the first Overkill album, and all these kind of formative early thrash bands. And this came out right in that same period, and it has that same feel and same sound. It's basically really good early thrash. It's by today's standards, it's not super fast. It's thrash fast. It's like some of those other albums. It's super heavy. It has pretty good production, but again, it's 1984 production, and it sounds like an independently recorded thrash album from 1984, which I think lends more to that feeling of, hey, this is something that's starting. This is something that's brand new, and people are kind of figuring out what the type of music is, what it's about, what it's supposed to sound like. And yeah, that's what this album, to me, it's like that in a nutshell. It's just it epitomizes that early thrash stuff. And apparently they were, I believe they're a San Francisco band. Their label is in Ventura, California. But they played with all those, early Death Angel and Exodus and Violence and all those sort of classic early Bay Area bands. and then had quite the rocky and in some cases sad history. They did this album, which I believe is their this is their first album after their demo, and they went through some lineup changes. They went through record label changes. Obviously, I think Target was only doing this kind of stuff for probably a couple of years. Went through breakups and reunions and band members dying and all kinds of stuff. So never really, it seemed like from this album and the sort of the context they were in, like Metal Church, early Metallica, early Overkill, it felt like, there were a lot of bands that I think were kind of on the same level at that time. Like around this album, it felt like it's kind of on the same level as these other thrash bands. And some of them became huge, and some of them just became quiet after a while. And Outlaws Rocket, unfortunately, they've done some other really good albums. They became way more concentrated on a sort of a more modern thrash sound after this album, because that's kind of the way that whole genre and the Bay Area metal was going. And they have some really good albums, really well recorded. But yeah, nothing that really stands out as much as this album to me. It's got that great cover. I mean, come on.
It's very colorful.
It's super colorful. It's got green. It's got the green in it, like every metal band had to have for some reason.
That's true. That was that era. Overkill green.
Overkill green. Yes, exactly. But yeah, it reminds me of that whole. It's good music. It's underappreciated, well played, good music. But nowadays, it reminds me of that era of when the thrash thing was going to be brand new, and I remember that was an exciting era. I remember hearing certainly Metal Church for the first time, and just the way that record sounds, in addition to the music that's on it, was just like, oh my god, this is going to be amazing. And Metallica, obviously, going from Kill 'Em All to Ride the Lightning, there was just a big step there. But yeah, that's what this album reminds me of, just kind of that exciting period of there's this whole new music happening, and it's going to be really cool. And little did people know.
Yeah, it definitely reminds me of a lot of those other bands in the U.S., particularly that had but I think get referred to now as U.S. power metal, because it's like it's not quite thrash.
Yeah,
but it's definitely faster than like just heavy metal, and it has some of that proto thrash,
Right.
The other band that comes to mind is Vicious Rumors, because they're also a Bay Area band that were never quite a thrash band. Like Lost Rocket definitely became a full-on thrash band by their third album, but yeah, they definitely have that same it's very fast at times. Again, for the time,
right.
But it's also quite varied. Like there was a lot of songs on there that were more just kind of standard heavy metal, or each song had a definite personality to it, which is again one of those things I really appreciate in an album. It's not just 10 copies of the same song,
right,
different lyrics.
Yeah, I think that's one thing about these sort of starting out periods for various genres is they aren't tied into just that narrow band range. They haven't maybe even figured out exactly where they want to focus, and so you get kind of these broader albums. And it's like, they're pretty sure they want to be a heavy metal band,
right?
And they're pretty sure they want to play fast stuff, and they're influenced by a lot of the thrash that's around them. But that doesn't mean that they're just going to play as fast as they can. Every song in the same tempo type stuff that later would become more common. And not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, I mean, there's certainly great examples like Rain in Blood where that works totally fine.
Yeah. So. Even Rain in Blood, if you listen to it nowadays, it sounds like it has so much variety compared to a lot of albums.
That's true. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like that whole thing of you couldn't really just be into, I only listen to music that's 200 beats per minute and blah, blah, blah. In those days, you could be into heavy metal, and you could go, I bought this new album, and the my favorite songs on it are these three really fast songs. And in fact, that was always kind of an exciting thing. I remember back in the day, you'd buy a new album and it'd be like, there'd be the one song on it that was really fast. And you'd be like, oh,
Right.
it's real cool. It stands out. It's better than having the one song that's a ballad, I guess.
Yeah. That's something I don't know that Lost Rocket ever did. Is there, I can't remember if
No,
there's a ballad song on here or not.
I don't think so.
I mean, if they did, it would
Stuff
probably
is-
be like Fade to Black sort of ballad.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right. And there, like you said, there's some slower stuff. There's some instrumental stuff, but nothing that goes into the ballady kind of range, as I recall.
Yeah, which is true for Oz too. Like both Fire in the Brain and Third Warning,
Yeah.
straightforward. Like, yeah, they never have a mellow song.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one good thing about it's good about today and it's good about back in the day is these bands that were on these independent labels. There was no A&R company or guy that was saying, hey, you've got to ship X number of units and it has to be accepted for radio airplay and all those things that other recording acts on more major labels might have had that pressure. These little labels, they didn't care most of the time. They knew who their fans were and they knew how to market it and that was it. So there's a lot of freedom there. And today we're anybody can do anything and reach hundreds of thousands of people with their music without ever having a record company or anybody that's going to do advertising for them or worries about censoring their lyrics or
right.
Anything like that. One of my notes that I wrote down is the band's original name, Lost Rocket. The original name was Depth Charge. Interesting. It's not a great name, but neither is Lost Rocket, frankly.
Well, and it's based on something, right? LAWS was the original thing.
Yes, it's a shoulder. I believe it's a shoulder-fired anti-tank rocket, the Lost Rocket from like Korean War era or Vietnam era, maybe. And I remember reading that in their bio that we had at one time, though I don't think it's on this jacket anywhere. And certainly not, there's no liner notes in this one.
And they decided they needed to change the spelling of both Laws and Rocket.
And not only that, it's not in any known language because it has little single dots over the A's, which that's not obviously not English or German or whatever. There are alphabets that have that because you can get it on the on standard fonts now. But yeah, that's weird. And ROCKIT, and yeah, it's just very odd.
It's the kind of thing bands would have to do nowadays just to have a name that isn't already used.
Oh my God, yeah.
Back then, you can pick a more common name than that. And
I will say, easy to search for on the internet. Very, very easy.
That's true. Yeah. It's a very simple logo, but it's actually pretty effective. Like it's nice and readable.
Yeah. They didn't go overboard. Well, obviously they probably didn't have a huge budget for their cover art, but
I mean, it doesn't have the same deep meaning the Oz logo does, but
exactly.
Not everyone can do that.
They've got their little mascot though.
Okay.
He has a little patch on that says Pyro Squad.
Is he coming back on later album covers? I can't remember.
I don't. This is the only one that I actually have on vinyl. The other albums I have the reissues of that were on Massacre Records. When they later on after they reformed and did an album in I think 2011, they put it out on Massacre Records, I believe. And at the same time, they reissued their back catalog on CD. And so all the other albums of theirs that I have, including the CD copy of this, are Massacre, the reissues. And I don't know if they faithfully reproduced like all the artwork or liner notes or random little cartoon characters that might have been drawn here and there.
Yeah, I was looking back at some reviews I'd written for Outburn magazine, because I actually reviewed that reunion album. I forgot the name of it now.
Oh, yeah. What is it called? Dead or Alive, or
I'll look it up and
yeah,
throw it up on the screen here. But yeah, I remember being fairly impressed with it. Like my review was pretty positive. It was. I think it was more of a like. It had more of that groove metal, like kind of Pantera influence than the early stuff did, but it wasn't like obnoxiously so.
That's interesting because to reunite for that album, they had previously broken up, and everybody but the drummer had formed a band called GAC that was a groove metal band.
Oh, okay.
And I had never heard of them before, and the Wikipedia page did not even have a link to info about GAC. GAC also probably not a good name to search the internet for.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there might be that groove metal kind of influence. And then, of course, right after their, I believe it was like right after their, that reunion, which was, I think it was the original People, their bass player died in 2018. I believe, I'm probably going to get these wrong because their bass player and their drummer both died really close together. I believe the bass player died of leukemia, and the drummer died of a motorcycle accident in 2014. And then after that, they had done this big reunion thing, and then it's kind of, I guess they've been kind of in limbo ever since. So it's kind of sad.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of those bands from that era that kind of reached that stature, like, did some reunions over the years, usually for some festival that like begged them to come over to Germany and play some shows.
Yeah.
But then, they don't necessarily keep it together going forward.
I think that was the case here. Is they actually played and did a live DVD of like not Wacken, but one of the big festivals, and that was the plan, just do that reunion and move on. And because of that, they recorded that reunion album, I believe.
Cool. Yeah. When I was researching this, I looked them up on Spotify, and they actually have all of their albums on there.
Oh, that's cool.
And they have all the Oz albums on there too, which is
that's awesome.
Really surprising. So yeah, I got a chance to listen to the second Loz Rocket album. What was it called? No Stranger to Danger. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I have that one. I have Know Your Enemy.
Oh, is that the third one?
I think so. And Annihilation Principle. And then the Buried Alive or Dead or Alive or whatever the reunion one is.
But yeah, No Stranger to Danger is interesting because it feels like they were at that point maybe being like pushed in a more commercial direction, because it's like the album cover is just a picture of the band, which is always a bad sign.
Okay, I remember that. I think we did get that as a promo at the Print Plague, because when I was looking at this album, I was like, God, isn't there like a black and white picture of the band, and they're wearing like, they have suspenders, and one guy's holding a coffee cup, and it's like, where was that? But that might have been the second album. And I remember them being kind of like, there was some change in direction there, but it's been a while since I've heard that album.
Yeah, like at the time, it probably seemed more drastic than it does now. Because it's like, I listened to it, and it's like the first song sounds like it could be on the first album. You know, it's still pretty fast and heavy, and a lot of it's that way. But there are definitely like one or two songs that are more like commercial, like in a way of like, you know, kind of more AC/DC, just kind of straightforward rock.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's not like obnoxiously commercial, but definitely moving away from the thrash sound. And then apparently they'd like, oh wait, we want to go that direction.
Right. Well, I think that second album was also on Target, and then I think the third album, I might be getting this wrong, but I think then they jumped to a new label, so maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Going from sort of proto thrash speed metal to AC/DC, it's like, I like all those things. But yeah.
Cool. Well, that's all the comments I have for that one.
Alrighty. Yeah, I don't think I have anything more.
So I guess we'll wrap this up for now. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. If you have some comments on either Oz or Laws Rocket, or any upcoming, yes, there we go, or any upcoming albums or bands you'd like to see us talk about on here, please leave some comments, subscribe, and hit that like button.
Yes.
So until next time, take care and stay metal.